our day-to-day lives, Tony and I, we work together, we present together, we live together, and against all odds, we're still together.
Today we'd like to share with you something of our journey as an evolving double act, and it's a journey that spans now 16 years, and it's had some real highs, and I think Julie would agree that it's also had some real lows. There have been occasions when we have found ourselves with our head in our hands saying, why are we doing this to each other? Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why?
And it's a perfectly reasonable question for us to ask, because when we first met, we were individual presenters and it was working well. We didn't need to change it. And yet we were both up for the challenge, so we thought we would give it a go. And as Tony said, it has been a challenge, and yet every single time we've come off stage together, we've come to the same conclusion. It's so worth it. There is something quite special that happens with duo delivery. I mean, think of all the double acts over the years that have really worked.
One of the nation's favourites, of course, is Ant and Dec. What a success story they are. And it was tested recently where Ant was in rehab for Dec to see how he could fare on his own. And of course, he's a great presenter in his own right, held his own, the show must go on, took the reins. And I think you will also agree that the nation did a kind of collective sigh of relief when Ant was back and everything was as it should be again.
Absolutely. And a personal favourite of mine, Morecambe and Wise. I mean, what's not to like? I can remember as a child the whole family crowding around the TV in anticipation of that Saturday night show. I mean, just magic. And what about the Christmas show, the Morecambe and Wise Christmas show? So special. Something really, really special about that. Where would we be if we didn't have Morecambe and Wise in the world?
I'm going to give you a sporting one now, Torval and Dean. Now, as figure skaters, they could have carved out really good singles careers, and yet there was something really magical about bringing the combination together into that duo. In the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, those purple costumes and dancing to the bolero. I mean, the whole world was absolutely fascinated because it was such an iconic performance. Even if you weren't born then, you've probably seen it. Such a ripple it made at that time. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Sometimes it's hard to put your finger on. Sometimes it's really hard to articulate what it is when two come together and create something new. But it matters. Let me introduce you to this fruity little number. It's earned its place in any worldwide hotel, restaurant, bar, cafe, enjoyed by so many worldwide. I give to you fresh orange juice.
Now let me introduce you to this bubbly, lively little fella. I mean, no celebration is complete without it. It's earned a solid reputation for being really high quality. I give you champagne.
Hooray! Now, just as either and both of these individually have earned the respect of the world as an offering in their own right and will continue to do so, the opportunity here really is if we were to blend these in equal parts, in equal measure. Steadily goes.
Beautiful.
We end up with something qualitatively different, something that is neither orange juice nor champagne, something that neither orange juice alone or champagne could bring to the party. Something fresh and interesting with a whole different kind of value brought to the audiences that would enjoy it. And this is called the cocktail, the mimosa.
And herein lies the potential for you as speakers. I mean, you come here with all your unique characteristics. How would it be if you were to blend those with the characteristics from another speaker. I mean, just imagine the fresh, interesting and new offering that you could bring to your clients. Just imagine where that might take you. I mean, this conference is a perfect opportunity for you to start to have those conversations and those discussions. And never mind this conference, what about in this room? There's so much talent here, so many opportunities. So just allow yourself to start to ponder about what kind of blend you could create.
We're going to share with you now a few of the learnings from our journey. And there'll be some mistakes and some challenges, because by sharing those you can bypass them and avoid them. And also we're going to share some top tips based on things that we found just work.
Now, it was November 2005, on a miserable, murky morning, and Tony and I found ourselves driving around Newcastle city centre with 2 hours to go before we were due on stage, having the mother of all rows.
I remember it so well. We were lost. We didn't have sat-nav in those days. Julie's got the map out on her knees, and I'm trying to see the signpost, get in the right lane. We'd seen junctions and roundabouts like several times, and we're no nearer the venue. And as stressful as all of that was, it wasn't why we were having a row. The reason we were having a row is because, on top of all of that, we're still trying to craft our keynote on the way to the gig. I know! How does this happen? You know, we're two professionals, we're conscientious, we're used to showing up really prepared, ready to deliver maximum value to our audiences. How did we end up planning it in the car?
Well, we'd made a fundamental mistake. We'd assumed that it would take the same amount of time to create a new keynote as a double act as it would single presenters. Completely wrong. It takes a lot longer. And here's 3 reasons why.
This one is particularly true of me and Julie. We've got 2 very headstrong individuals who are passionate about the material. We've got tried and tested methods of delivering that material. We've got stories that we know work. We've got preferences. And we've got opinions. And we were sort of tug of war with this material. We'd dismantle it and then we'd put it back together. And it was all for the good of the keynote. It was getting better and better. But we just seriously underestimated how much time that takes when it's 2 people compared to when you're doing all that between your own ears as an individual. It was a really harsh lesson.
Here's the second reason. I mean, when you're planning a new keynote as an individual presenter, you know you've got to put time and preparation into your diary. And if something comes up, say you get another booking or there's a family emergency, you know you're going to need to reprioritize. But when you've got 2 busy diaries and things come up, it's so much more difficult to replace any time that you've taken out. And what we realised was on this Newcastle gig was that we lost 2 pieces of preparation time that we never regained. We never reclaimed those times.
And they were real crucial ones. Ones were really going to allow us to get momentum, which we ended up doing in the car. Anyway, unthinkable. The third one is about how we underestimate, I think, as independent trainers, presenters, speakers, just how much of those little snippets of time we might use for our preparation. You know, I've got new material, I'm in the shower, I'm kind of pondering about the presentation. I'm picking up my daughter from school, I've got 15 minutes to just voice it to the empty car. I've got a client meeting in London, that's an hour and a half each way that I can just be playing around with that material. They weren't diaried in as preparation time, but wow, they add up. And very rarely did it work out that we had those kinds of snippets of time overlapping. And anyway, you know, there's only so much of that that was going to be useful when we're part of a double act, because you can only do so much when you're not with your partner. And if we go back to the Torval and Dean thing, yes, they might have been able to take care of their fitness separately. practice a few of the technical moves separately. But if they were going to pull off a performance like Bolero, the majority of that time was going to have to be in the same space, practicing, rehearsing, tweaking and honing, making it better together. And that's really where we'd seriously underestimated.
Now the good news is we pulled ourselves together and we made a really good job of it. Somehow.
It reminds me of something when we were preparing for this talk, and mimosa as a metaphor, and we read the International Bar Association guidelines on making a mimosa, and it said to make a good mimosa, first of all, make sure both ingredients are well chilled. My goodness, that was the absolute opposite of how we arrived in Newcastle. And it was one of those where it was like, never, ever, ever will we let that happen again.
So the first takeaway here is that you've got to commit to the double act. You've got to commit time and focus. And so our memory hook here is the double act pact.
We're going to roll forward in time to 2008 now. We were presenting at a London conference. We had about 200 entrepreneurs waiting for us to present. And we had honoured the double act pact. We had put our groundwork in and we were feeling pretty pleased with ourselves that we were prepared.
Now you know how it is as a speaker when you arrive at a venue. Often you get the opportunity to network with other people, and Tony and I really love that. We get really energized, and on this occasion a lot of people there. I could see that Tony was deep in conversation, and so was I, conversing with people, and I was fascinated because I met a woman who grew up in Singapore, and I grew up in Singapore. So we got really immersed in a conversation. We were reminiscing about the famous Raffles hotel. We were reminiscing about Orchard Road and the wonderful street food and Changi Beach. And I was really, really getting into this conversation. And then all of a sudden I realized that we were all being brought in and everyone was being asked to take their seats because we were about to welcome the guest speakers. And we were the guest speakers, and I hadn't talked to Tony since we'd got out the car.
So we were neglecting something pretty important here. We've got another little prop here, which we call the energy triangle. And here's me, this corner here, here's Julie, and here's the audience. And I was in a really good state. Julie was in a really good state. And we'd really attended to the connection with the audience. We were feeling really connected to the audience. And that would have been enough as an individual presenter. We're ready to go. But we're a double act. And we missed this crucial link, which is to really energetically connect before we go on stage so that we arrive as a double act. And to our embarrassment, really, looking back on it, it was about 10 minutes into the presentation before these two individuals who turned up on stage to share material actually became a double act. And that's the equivalent of an individual presenter warming up on stage. And we can get away with it from time to time, but it's not what we're aiming for. And so again, this was a harsh lesson to us.
So this was contrasted. About 2 weeks later, we were delivering a presentation together, and actually it was exactly the same keynote, but this time we spent that time connecting before we got on stage, so that when we arrived on stage, we were a connected double act. And it made a massive difference, a tangible difference to the presentation.
So just to bring us up to speed here, we've got the committing time and focus to the double act, putting that work in, the double act pact.
We've got the energy triangle, making sure that we're both really connected before we get on stage. Now, very early on in our journey, we made the decision that each of us would know the whole keynote inside out, so that each of us could deliver the whole keynote or any part of the keynote or any thread of the keynote at any given time.
Well, there's a very practical reason to that. If one of us was ill, we could still honour the booking, we could give the audience value, or we could deliver professionally and competently.
It also really adds to the naturalness, because beyond the open and the close, we don't tend to know who's going to deliver which parts or which threads. And so what that means is that we have to be in tune with each other and metaphorically ready to pass the ball and receive the ball at any given time. And what this does is that it stops us from potentially treading on each other's toes or interrupting each other's flow.
So how is it that we actually do the passing of the ball? Well, for us, it's turned out to be something really quite subtle. It's a little micro pause and a little micro movement or look in the direction of the partner.
Tony just passed the ball to me.
She's just passed it back.
Now, the challenge with this is that when you're an individual presenter, there is no ball. You just need to connect with your own material, you connect with the audience, you get in your own flow. And have you ever noticed how when you are really in your zone, there can be some time distortion? I mean, for me, I can sort of an hour's gone by, and it feels like it's only been 10 minutes.
Well, this became a challenge for me. It was another London gig. This was in 2009, and we were presenting to a group of, it was an industry conference this time. And I can remember that the 2 weeks leading up to this conference, we had done a lot of independent delivery. And so I'd gone out of the practice of passing the ball. Now, I have to say, we had committed to the double act pact, we were well prepared, and the energy triangle we had connected before we went on stage, and we did start off passing the ball quite nicely between us. And then I got the ball in this moment, and I can remember I was running with the ball, and I'm like hogging the ball, and I'm like really in my flow, and I'm like, now me and the audience, we're really connected, and I can see that first story's really gone down well, and I'm ready into my next story, and maybe there's my partner here who's not getting a look in.
And I could see that this was working, and after about 5 minutes I was thinking, any minute now he's going to pass the ball to me. And 6 minutes went by, and I thought, I'm ready. 7 minutes went by and I was thinking, hello. 8 minutes have gone by and I'm thinking, is he actually going to pass the ball to me? And by 9 minutes, I'm feeling like I'm on the substitute bench. I'm not even in the game.
To my shame, it was 10 minutes in when I suddenly had this awareness that I was neglecting my partner in the double act on stage. And that's inexcusable, because there's a reason we're on stage as a double act, because we consistently deliver more value to our audience when we're both up there contributing than when either one of us present individually. And so I'm finally, sheepishly at 10 minutes, passing the ball to Julie, and she's finally back in the game.
So you've got to keep that ball moving. You've got to keep it flowing. And as a game show host might say, you've got to be fair when you work in a pair.
Or it could be, there's much more than you owe when you play in a duo. Anyway, enough cheese. We've got to keep this ball moving is the key thing. And so we've got the double act pact, we've got the energy triangle, and we've got that passing of the ball. We're going to go back in time now to 2006, and we're presenting a much smaller gig. This is trainers and HR, and basically it's a smaller room, and you know how sometimes in the smaller rooms they have the projector on a little table and you've got to dodge the beam so you've not got the presentation on your shirt. It was one of those kind of gigs.
Yeah, and everything was going swimmingly. We'd prepared, we were connected, we were passing the ball really well. I thought, yes, we've got it here, until the moment when we were ready to press the button for the first slide. And all of a sudden, because we were dodging the beam, we found ourselves on opposite sides of the room and we'd broken connection.
It was really a bad show, this, because, you know, as an individual speaker, of course, we just step one side or the other, job done. But we've got an extra thing to think about here. And normally, we would have both gone to the same side. And we've kept the connection and got the screen. But what we hadn't done is our due diligence on the room before we got up here and started. And it was one of those rooms where actually there was not much space on this side, and we'd have probably ended up like a couple of sardines presenting. It just wouldn't have looked very good at all. But we own that. I mean, in retrospect, what we should have done is ditch the slides. You know, they were good, but we didn't need them in order to perform a really good, solid presentation. I think we've all got to be ready to ditch the slides if there's a power cut or a technical thing or whatever. And to keep the connection and keep that double act portrayal that we wanted, I think that would have taken priority if we'd really done that due diligence. So it's all about managing the stage awareness, managing the space that we have here.
Now, as a speaker, you're going to be needing to move about the stage. You know, there's times when you might need to write on the flip chart, or you might need to mark out different areas of the stage to tell a story, or you might have props like we've got. It's really important when you're working in a double act to make sure that you don't walk in front of your presenter, because you're breaking connection between them and the audience. Equally, you don't want to walk behind them, because now you've disappeared, you've got no connection with the audience. It's a bit like disappearing behind the flip chart or vanishing behind the roll-up banner. It's not going to work.
So again, just a little more to think about when there's two of you on stage. So if it came to a part of the presentation and I've got the ball, and I'm going to pass it this time, but I've got the ball momentarily, and I'm going to do something with the prop on the table over here. Julie knows what's coming. She can anticipate that, and already by the time I'm coming over here, she's created some space for me. So I'm not having to bump into her or cross in front of her or behind her and break either of our connection with the audience.
Equally, if I'm going to be talking about the mimosa, Tony knows it's coming, he's cleared the space, there's no obstacle, I can come over here. It's all really elegant in the way that we're working together.
Simple and yet really, really important. And this is all about that stagecraft, and we've got a particular prop for this. It's about gauging the stage, so we can only think of one thing on this, and it was, everyone needs one, a stage gauge.
Of course.
And then what we've found is there's something that makes this whole thing a little bit easier for us. And over recent years, this is what we've put into practice, is having a consistent side that you are in relation to the other person. Because a bit like Ant and Dec, you'd always see Ant on the left and Dec on the right as you're looking at the screen. And there's probably a branding thing in there as well. But for us on stage, we've just found it's one less thing to think about. We're now in familiar territory to be moving out of each other's way and keeping that nice and smooth. And we're more unconsciously competent of it, and it just eases the whole process.
So nowadays, when you see Tony and I present, you tend to see me on this side and Tony on that side.
So just to remind now, we'll hold these ones up so you can see, because I know at the back you may not be able to see the tables. We've got our absolute commitment to time and focus to the double act pact.
We've got the energy triangle. That's so important to connect before we get on stage, so that when we arrive, we're a connected double act.
And then we're going to keep this ball moving, because we've both come to contribute, and that's what makes it the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
And then we've got the stage gauge, reminding us about the importance of managing the stage so that you're elegantly presenting as a double act.
Let's just return to the metaphor that we began with. So just like orange juice and like champagne, each of you has your own unique characteristics that are of value in their own right. You're bringing that great value to the world and to your audiences and your clients. And the potential is in the blends that you could put together in equal parts with one other speaker. And we'd like you to think about here at this conference, one other person that you could have an exploratory conversation about the possible blend that could be created is the equivalent of our mimosa.
So just to wrap up now, one other great advantage of presenting as a double act is that when you know you've done a good job, you come off stage, you're feeling really good about what you've done and the value that you've added to your clients and to your audience, you've got somebody to celebrate with. Cheers.